Happy Tuesday, everyone. It's that time of day where we take a moment and pause and say thanks to everyone who's making the world run. Let's start with the men and women in the military, police officers, firefighters, doctors, nurses, lab technicians, hospital orderlies, small business owners, restaurateurs, truck drivers, everyone working at the grocery stores and fast food joints, the Port of Los Angeles and Union Station, the pilots and flight attendants. Let's listen to the national anthem. And a very happy Tuesday to you at 12:07 in the West. Talk Radio 790 KABC, the John Phillips Show, broadcasting live from the Morongo Casino Resort and Spa Living Room Studios. Mr. Randy Wang has the week off. He'll be back with us on Monday. Presumably, he's not flying American. If he's flying American, maybe he's here on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. Or maybe it'll be longer than that. You never know. I hope he enjoys Dallas. 800-222-KABC is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. The big news today is that former President Donald Trump is expected to be indicted yet again. This time it's associated with the 2020 election and what happened at the Capitol on January the 6th. This would, by my count, be the third indictment. It happened first in New York City with Alvin Bragg, the DA there. Then it happened down in Florida at Mar-a-Lago in Miami court. And now this third one is associated with the new special counsel that is looking into what happened in the 2020 election. And as I sit here reading the news on this subject and trying to process everything that's going on, I say to myself, what's next? This is number 3, and there's potentially more in the future. Where's the next one coming from? Night court? Maybe traffic court? How about The Hague? Could be that. The People's Court? Is Judge Jerry Scheindlin still presiding? Or is it Judge Marilyn Milian? Haven't watched in a while. There's Judge Judy, although the show isn't called Judge Judy anymore. It's got a new name. Judge Joe Brown, Judge Mathis. And then there's the panel of judges on RuPaul's Drag Race. Maybe that's where he will be appearing next. So it's one after another. And conventional wisdom is that if you just indict him enough times, he will not be electable in the 2024 presidential election. That the public will see all of this smoke and say there must be fire, and it's time to move on. Let's vote for Ron DeSantis in the primary. How about that Nikki Haley or Tim Scott or Larry Elder or whoever else that's running against him? And then, if he survives the primary, surely Joe Biden will beat him in the general election, and nature will take its course. The problem with that philosophy is that based on the most recent polling that we have, it looks like that's not the case. In fact, in politics, one of the things that you always have to do is keep an eye on the law of unintended consequences. You do something that you think will benefit you, but watch out, the opposite may be true. In 2008, Republicans thought that Barack Obama would be much easier to beat than Hillary Clinton. The Republican primary was decided long before the Democratic primary was, so Republicans decided to be mischievous and vote in the Democratic primary if their state allowed that, and they voted for Barack Obama because they thought it would be easier for John McCain to beat him. Then a funny thing happened in November. Barack Obama mopped the floor with John McCain. In 2016, Democrats thought that Jeb Bush was the candidate that was to be feared the most. He was raising all the money. He had a name that everyone knew. He won 2 statewide elections in what was then a swing state. His brother was president. His father was president. His father was vice president. Surely Jeb Bush was the one to be afraid of. So let's all go after Jeb and hope that Donald Trump is the Republican nominee because we can stomp all over him in the general. And then a funny thing happened in November. Donald Trump ended up beating Hillary Clinton. Today, it seems like Democrats are of the belief that if you just indict Donald Trump in enough places, it will make him unelectable and the public will just move on. Well, according to a New York Times poll that just posted today, that's not happening at all. In fact, the poll today is causing Democrats to start pulling their hair out. According to the recently released New York Times poll, President Joe Biden is receiving 43% from registered voters surveyed, and Donald Trump is receiving 43% of registered voters surveyed. In the Republican primary, Donald Trump received support from 54% of GOP primary voters. The runner-up is Ron DeSantis at 17% and a very distant second. In the Democratic primary, Biden is leading with 64% of Democrats. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. had 13%, and Marianne Williamson had 10%. So as an incumbent president running for re-election against token opposition, Biden's at 64%, Trump is at 54%. They're 10 points apart. It's not supposed to be like that. And when you dig deeper into the numbers, Trump is doing much better this time than he did with Latino voters, than he did in 2020, or certainly 2016. And there are all kinds of warning signs in those Democratic primary numbers saying the Democratic voters are not happy with Joe Biden. In fact, with the overall electorate, both candidates are unpopular. 54% of voters disapprove of Biden, and 55% of voters disapprove of Trump. They're about equally disliked by the public at large. Now, if this race is even Steven, if this race is in a dead heat between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, that benefits Donald Trump for a couple of different reasons. Most Hillary Clinton got more votes than Donald Trump in 2016, but because of the way the Electoral College works, he still was able to cobble together enough electoral votes to win the election. Had he polled even with Hillary Clinton, the electoral majority that he had would have been more lopsided than it was. The other thing to think about is that in this election, unlike in 2016, when you had two unpopular candidates running against one another, this time around, you could have as many as 3 third-party candidates who have some degree of notoriety, some degree of being able to raise money, and certainly some ability to move the needle. Think about this for a second. Of all of the potential third-party candidates that we've been discussing, I'm going to give you the names of the 3 most likely scenarios. One is an already declared candidate, and that is Cornel West. Cornel West is a black college professor who is a regular on the chat show circuit. He's extremely charismatic, left-wing, and to the left of Joe Biden. Extremely critical of Joe Biden and willing to say so publicly. If you are a black male voter who is not happy with Joe Biden for one reason or another, or maybe you just think he's too old to be president and he's senile, and someone who's senile shouldn't have access to the nuclear codes, Cornel West is a very attractive candidate to you. And when you think about the states that will decide the election, think about Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, North Carolina, Virginia. All of those states have significant black populations, where if Democrats don't clean house with the black vote, they lose the statewide election. And you don't need to lose that many to tip the scales. Having Cornel West on the ballot in those states is absolutely catastrophic for Joe Biden. Another potential third-party candidate is from the No Labels group. That's the group of people who don't like Donald Trump, they don't like Joe Biden, and they regard themselves as political moderates. Think about the Never Trump Republicans and the Democrats who want criminals locked up, and they look at Joe Biden's judicial appointments and it scares the living daylights out of them. But they, generally speaking, line up with the Dems. Think about suburban voters who are socially liberal but want the government to run. Those people would all gravitate towards the campaign of Joe Manchin, West Virginia senator. He's in a weird predicament right now because he's supposed to be running for re-election in West Virginia, which is a state that used to be Democratic, that is now reliably Republican, and a real candidate is running against him. A real candidate who's also a sitting governor and a Republican, former Democrat turned Republican. Joe Manchin would likely not survive re-election should he choose to do so. Because he wouldn't survive re-election and he wants to stay in politics, I'm sure he's looking at this race and he's saying, hey, wait a minute. Most voters regard themselves as moderate. You have an unpopular Republican. You have an unpopular Democrat. I'm a Democrat who has credibility with Republicans. I should run as a third-party candidate on the No Labels ticket. If that's the case, then he will likely steal suburban voters that would otherwise go to Joe Biden. People who hate them both but hate Donald Trump more. They wouldn't vote for Donald Trump, but they don't like Joe Biden. So if you give them a third option, if you give them an option of no confidence that doesn't involve voting for Donald Trump, Joe Biden loses those people. A third option for a third-party candidate, and I don't know how this one would play at all, is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He's currently running in the Democratic primary, but you can't really put his politics in any kind of a box. He is a Democrat and a liberal Democrat on the subject of race. He was critical of the Supreme Court when they threw out affirmative action in college admissions. But you listen to him on the vaccine, or you listen to him on the border, or you listen to him on crime, and he sounds downright conservative. He has the Kennedy name, which has a lot of cachet with Democrats, particularly of a certain era, and he is consistently polled in double digits in Democratic primary polls. So he has some degree of a following within the Democratic Party, but you look at where he shows up on television, and you see him on Fox, and you see him on Newsmax, and you see him on One America, and you hear him on the conservative podcasts and radio shows. He's not campaigning like a typical Democrat campaigns, which means if you put him on the November ballot, I don't know where his votes come from. But it's certainly a place where people who would otherwise vote for Joe Biden could end up landing. If you put all three of them on the ballot, in addition to Biden and Trump, you could end up with a scenario that looks a whole lot like 1992, when you had Ross Perot on the ballot along with Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush. Because there was a viable third-party candidate, Bill Clinton was able to win that election with 43% of the vote. Yes, Ross Perot got in double digits. No, I don't believe any of these candidates are capable of getting double digits. But if you add up all of their votes together, maybe you could end up with a scenario where they collectively come in generating double digits in terms of percentages. If that's the case, then the winner of the 2024 election could theoretically win the election with 42, 43, 44% of the vote. Which means if you keep your people together, if you keep your supporters, your coalition together, it's easier to win the election. If your people are willing to walk on glass and fire to go to the polls to vote for you. You're not relying on the casual voter or the flaky voter or the voter who might vote or might not vote. Then you're in a position of power. One of the things with Donald Trump supporters that's been there since the very beginning is they love him. It's not enough to create a majority in this country. It's somewhere in the high 30s, low 40s. But they're with him through thick and thin. They're not going anywhere. And for all the people who thought that this was going to be a contested Republican primary where maybe those people would end up ditching him for Ron DeSantis or someone else, I haven't seen any evidence that says that's going to happen. If he can keep his people together and Biden's coalition is picked off by a little bit go to Joe Manchin over here, a little bit go to Cornel West over there, and a little bit go to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. here, you end up with a scenario that's the nightmare scenario for Joe Biden and the Democrats. And you look at where Biden is in the Democratic primary right now, and you look at the numbers that he's pulling in. There's a whole lot to be worried about there if you're Joe Biden. Coming in at 64% when you're running in what's essentially an uncontested primary is the danger zone. That means a third of Democrats, more than a third of Democrats, are unhappy with Joe Biden to some degree or another, or at least unhappy enough to either support someone else in the primary or to be undecided. That is catastrophic. And then you look at the two candidates that are running against him. You have Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's essentially running against the party. He's polling at 13%. And Marianne Williamson, who's a dingbat and a crystal saleswoman, is polling at 10%. So that means that each of them are polling in the double digits, and almost a quarter of Democrats are voting for one of the two of them over Joe Biden. What I'm saying to you is this. I do not know if we're going to see all three of the potential third-party candidates that I talked about on the November ballot. But what I'm saying is, if they do end up on the November ballot, that's very bad news for Joe Biden, very good news for Donald Trump. And if Donald Trump ends up winning this election with a plurality of votes, with 42% of the votes, but a majority of the Electoral College votes, and certainly enough to satisfy the requirement to win the election, the left and the news media will absolutely lose their minds. You saw what happened in 2016 when he won the election but didn't get more votes than Hillary Clinton. You saw the tears, you saw the tantrums, you saw the protests, you saw the pink hats, you saw the marches, you saw the anger on social media, you saw all of it. If in 2024, after they've indicted him in every court in all the land, and they've hit him with every negative piece you could absolutely hit him with at every major newspaper and television network in the country, if he wins the election with 42% of the vote, I think the tantrums that you saw in 2016 will be child's play. I think they will collectively lose their minds. And right now, I want to hear from you. Many of you have friends who hate him with the hot, hot hate of 1,000 suns. You have family members that post about him nonstop on social media. You've lost friendships and relationships, maybe even jobs, over whether or not you support Donald Trump. You know the people who hate him and who hate him with the volume turned all the way up. If the scenario I just described, and play with me with this because I think it could happen. I'm not saying it will. I'm saying it's certainly in the cards if you end up with 3 third-party candidates on the ballot. So play with me here in the sandbox for a little bit. If Trump wins the election in 2024 with 43% of the vote, what kind of reaction do you think you're going to get this time? 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222. Your calls coming up, but right now it's time for KABC Dependable Traffic. It's 12:31 on the John Phillips Show, Talk Radio 790 KABC. If you want to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And if you want to listen to one of last week's episodes, because let's say you were on vacation, that's easy to do. Just subscribe to the podcast. You can just whip out your smartphone, find the button that says podcast, press on that, type in the name of the show, The John Phillips Show, hit subscribe, and all of the episodes will be downloaded directly to your phone, and you can enjoy it whenever you'd like. The big news today is that it's expected that former President Donald Trump will be indicted yet again. On this same day, a poll dropped from the New York Times showing him and Joe Biden statistically tied in a race for the presidency at 43% each. When you throw in third-party candidates, Donald Trump could end up winning this election with 41, 42, 43% of the vote. Given the news cycle and how much the people who don't like him really don't like him, if Donald Trump wins the 2024 election with, say, 42% of the vote, what kind of reaction do you think the country is going to get? 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222. Your calls coming up, but right now it's time for Headline. It's 12:38 on the John Phillips Show, Talk Radio 790 KABC. The Fix California Hour coming up after the news at 1. One medical expert from NBC News went on television today and said that COVID numbers are going back up again, so we should all be wearing masks again. And you know who is watching. That's right, the fake doctor, Barbara Ferrer. Could mask mandates be coming back to Los Angeles County? We'll explore that topic with Kira Davis. Right now, we're taking your calls at 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222. It's expected that former President Donald Trump will be indicted yet again today. He's already been indicted at least twice by my count. Yet, in the same news cycle, a New York Times poll just dropped showing him statistically tied with President Biden. Each of them has 43% support, according to the poll. When you throw in the third-party candidates, it's entirely possible Donald Trump could win this election with 43% of the vote or less. If he wins the 2024 election with 43% of the vote or less, what kind of reaction do you think we're going to get from the left, from the people who hate him, from the mainstream media? We all know what we saw in 2016. What do you think you'd see in 2024? Let's begin with Chris in Fontana. Chris, you're on KABC. Hello.
Hello, how you doing?
Good.
I just wanted to chime in and say that what we've learned in Inauguration Day 2017 with the left organizing their protest and their paid protesters, that was child's play compared to what we will see on Inauguration Day 2025 if Trump is successful. He's been beating them so far on every count. We've had the Twitter files come out that have shown what the government and even the Biden administration has been doing. So all that collectively is working against the left, which they're just continually spiking these stories so that the information does not come out. And if Trump is able to beat down these charges, and Dershowitz, none of them are constitutional. They're all a stretch by the imagination with legal theory that has never been tested. These cases are all going to be dismissed. Unfortunately, Trump has to go through the entire process to prove it. But having said that, the left will lose their minds, as you're saying. I think this is not going to go over well, and people should probably prepare to get some popcorn. I mean, without getting sarcastic or derogatory, it's going to be a real, you know what show. And that's what I think. I think we're headed for a lot of paid professional activists and protesters to come out that'll even make January 6th look like, a schoolyard fight. So that's my take on it. That's my 2 cents. Thanks for letting me chime in.
All right. Thanks for the call, sir. I appreciate it. Here's my prediction. I think there's going to be an off-the-charts level of anger, but I think the anger is going to be sprayed in all directions. The same way you saw the anger at Amy Coney Barrett getting on the U.S. Supreme Court. They weren't just angry at her. They were angry at Dianne Feinstein because she didn't put up enough of a fight in the committee hearing. They were angry at the Democrats in Congress for not replacing Dianne Feinstein on that committee soon enough. They were angry at Ruth Bader Ginsburg for sticking around too long. They were essentially angry at the world. If Trump wins with 43% of the vote, they obviously hate him, so he's going to be at the top of the list. But they're going to be angry at Joe Biden. They're going to say, you stayed in the game beyond your best by date. And because of that, a certain number of voters didn't vote for you because they think that you're senile, and you are. So they're going to throw him under the bus. Kamala is a gaffe machine because she's not a viable candidate and she didn't rise to the occasion. They're going to blame her for not being a strong enough of a candidate to replace Joe on the ticket. They're going to be extremely angry at all the third-party candidates for putting their names on the ballot. They'll regard them as vanity candidates and spoiler candidates that cost them the election. They're going to be extremely angry at any Democratic voter who ended up voting for any of them. They're going to be angry at Gavin Newsom for sitting on the sidelines and not jumping in the race and giving the Democrats a primary choice where they didn't necessarily have to go with Biden or someone who runs against the party or sells crystals for a living. They're going to be angry at the Democrats in Congress for not getting rid of the Electoral College after they already lost the 2016 election while gaining the popular vote. I think they're just going to be angry at everyone involved in the process. And when you have anger that goes in all directions, they're going to be acting out publicly. They're going to be acting out on social media. They're going to be acting out privately. This is going to be a complete meltdown, a collective meltdown of everyone in the country who hates Donald Trump. And then with 42 or 43% of the vote, Trump will get 100% of the Supreme Court nominations, 100% of the nominations for people to run the various departments and agencies. He'll be able to run the entire executive branch of government, and it will absolutely drive them nuts. 800-222-KABC is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. More of your calls coming up, but right now it's time to take a look at the roads. It's 1249 on the John Phillips Show, Talk Radio 790 KABC. The Fix California Hour coming up after the news at 1. I know this sounds like it's too crazy to be true, but could mask mandates be coming back to Los Angeles County? The quote-unquote medical experts are now saying that we should be wearing masks again, and if they're going to catch anyone's ear in public health, you know who is going to be the first to jump. That's right, the village idiot, Barbara Ferrer. We'll explore that with Kira Davis coming up in moments. Right now, we're taking your calls at 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222. The big rumor today is that President Trump could be indicted yet again. And despite that fact, according to a new New York Times poll, he and Joe Biden are tied at 43%. When you put the third-party candidates' names on the ballot, that's bad news for Biden, and Trump could win the election with 43%. If that happens, what do you think the reaction will be? 800-222-KABC. Let's go to Brad in Brea. Brad, you're on KABC. Hello.
Hey, John. Hello. Love the show. You guys do a great job.
Thank you.
I agree with you. I truly think, I mean, we've seen what they do. It's, when they don't get their way, it's mob rules. And they burn things down. They pick up toys, and this is how they try to change things when they don't get their way, when people don't vote with them. And unfortunately, the leadership from the president down and vice president encourage it. They tell people, this is going to happen and it's going to keep happening, and we support them, and they're going to have GoFundMe things for all of them. And I think it's going to be, it's going to be like a civil war. God help you if you're in a blue city, because your sheriff and your police department might not be responding to help you out, because we saw that already happen before. And this one's for Randy. Quite frankly, I think it's going to get. I think it is going to happen.
All right. Thank you for the call, sir. I appreciate it, quite frankly. Let's go to Mike in Agora Hills. Mike, you're on KABC. Hello.
Thank you so much. I'm a longtime listener, and I really think it's a financial thing. Somebody goes to an Ivy League school, they expect to work for the government and get their pension, and once they work for the government so many years, then they get their college paid off. And then Washington, D.C. is the richest area in America now. And that's what we're up against. I appreciate, I'd like your opinion on what I'm saying, but I really think it's not a hatred of Trump. It's just they want theirs, and the rest of us could, do whatever.
Well, in Washington, D.C., a couple of things are evident, and it doesn't matter who's there. If you're the party in power, you control virtually everything if it's the executive branch. You control the appointments. You control who works in the departments. You control essentially all the toys, all the ambassadors. They all work for you. They all get their appointments through you. You can raise a lot of money, and with the money, you can help your friends. If you're out of power, it's no fun in Washington, D.C., because the other side is the side with all of the toys. And with Trump, there's the extra added wrinkle of he doesn't hire that many consultants. Most Republican consultants make their living on big election cycles, on the presidentials, on the midterms, and they're reliant on these candidates to hire them and pay them a huge wage. Well, with Donald Trump, he doesn't listen to anyone, including consultants. He does his own thing. And so from the point of view of Republican consultants, he's essentially put many of them out of business because they missed out on the 2016 election cycle. They missed out on the 2020 election cycle. And if he's the nominee, they'll miss out on the 2024 election cycle. So that is a grand total of 3 presidential elections where they thought that they'd find a Meg Whitman who would pay them a mint and they'd be able to put their kids through school off of some sap that they latched onto. And the fact that he doesn't want to pay them what they think that they're worth, or he doesn't want to hire them altogether, makes them hate him too. So as a disruptor, not only does he piss off the other side, but he pisses off the consultants who work for the Republican Party too, because their ship, which they thought would be coming in, will not be coming in if he's the nominee because he plays by his own rules. It's 12:54. This is Talk Radio 790 KABC. It's 12:58 on the John Phillips Show, Talk Radio 790 KABC. We've got 2 more hours coming up on today's show. The Fix California hour is next. Kira Davis joins us because the quote-unquote public health experts are now saying that COVID numbers are continuing to rise, and that means all of us should be wearing a mask yet again. You know who is paying attention to what they're saying. Could mask mandates be coming back to L.A. County? We'll explore. This is the John Phillips Show on Talk Radio 790 KABC.